Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Occult Think Tank. My name is Greg. In this video, I am going to be talking about books of the Bible that were not canonized. They are things like the lost books of the Bible, or as this one is called, the forgotten books of Eden, one of which, as you can see, is the book of the Secrets of Enoch, which I can go into in a future video if you guys want. The thing is, what I'm going to be focusing on for this video is the book of First Adam and Eve. And this will show very clearly how this is entirely written from the Christian narrative. It is not going by the understanding of Genesis as a Jew would look at it, or as the text of the Hebrew with Genesis that I have showed you guys, that of what would fit that story. This is called something being pseudepigrapha. And yes, the book of Enoch is also along that line. You may be wondering, okay, what the fuck is that? Now, this does claim that this is not to say that these documents are forgeries, just that for one reason or another they are not considered part of biblical text. Which, that builds a type of conspiracy, that there's a conspiracy behind these texts not being in the Bible. No, that's not true. Something being pseudepigrapha, if you're curious what that means, it is something that is falsely attributed works or text whose claimed author is not the true author. It is somebody trying to rewrite a story to fit their narrative. You could term it much like what we would have now of fan fiction. Something that is fan fiction you would not regard with the same validity as the actual work of fiction that the fan fiction is based on. Because fan fiction is somebody taking and running with characters that were already made up by somebody else and making up a story that they want. Well, this is what we have with Christians. Because what they do, and I've showed this in comments from people, even on my own videos, where people will try to claim that what is actually in the text, that I can show you in black and white, right there it is, they will say that's not what it's actually saying. That they will try and claim that what is actually being said is something that you don't even see anywhere in the text. That is the dishonest nature of the scumbags we're talking about. And that is the dishonest nature of what brought about things like the Book of Enoch. It might be popular among the hellfire and brimstone type of Christian, what I would also term the Christian inquisitors, because they have the Inquisition mindset. They might like it. It might make them jerk off to the idea of people being tortured, but it's bullshit. The reason they want to have shit like that is that feeds into their power trip of think as we say, do as we say, or else. The thing is, when it comes to First Adam and Eve, I never really bothered with much of this past the first book of Adam and Eve, because when I found this in my late teens to early 20s, and I started going through the book of First Adam and Eve, it was a joke. And I will show you what I'm talking about, because this is a complete rewrite of Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden. The thing is, what this is also showing is the absolute sadistic nature of the God of the Bible. And just for ease of things, I had broke down the different chapters to make it easier to see how many times Adam and Eve essentially kill themselves. This would be the first one at chapter 2. In verse 2, they fell on their faces from fear that came upon them, and they were as dead. And one thing that you will notice is the repeated mention of the word. That this is what makes it Christian. Because they use this idea of Jesus being that his word refers to Jesus. That is an entirely Christian bullshit idea. Because word in the Greek is logos. It is not the name of a person. Never was, never will be. But Christians don't care about the truth. They only care about a narrative that fits what they want to push. The thing is, even going by that, in First Adam and Eve, but chapter 2, right at verse 2, basically they killed themselves or died from fear. Then we have chapter 5. At verse 2, Adam raised his eyes, saw the rock on the roof of the cave that covered them, and so he wept and smote heavily upon his breast until he dropped and was as dead. And Eve weeping, for she believed he was dead. Then, down near the end of that chapter, at verse 13, Eve is, "But if thou wilt not give him life, then take me, even me, like him, that we both may die the same day." So essentially in chapter 5, we have not only Adam killing himself in the beginning of it, but then the God sitting back and watching this shit, and I guess didn't give a fuck. And then the beginning of chapter 6, for they killed themselves through grief. But the God, being the sadistic motherfucker that he is, he would raise them and comfort them. That's twice that they've killed themselves, and twice that the God has been, "Nope, you're coming back." And then you transgressed of your own free will. How do you have the ability to make a free will choice if you do not know good from evil? That is, you could say, the paradox of the original sin. But notice, here they have in verse 7 of chapter 6, "But the wicked Satan, who continued not in his first estate or kept his faith. Why would Satan need to have any faith? Because he would have clear evidence in front of him. The only reason a person says they have faith is in something they have no evidence to support. Because if you have evidence to support something, you don't need faith. However, that is all Christian jargon. It is simply bullshit. The thing is, what this does, if you really look at it, from the aspect of coming from this God, the God is psychopathic to narcissistic, because it is all about himself. Every bit of it is entirely self-centered. But then in chapter 9, once again, they fell into the water and would have put an end to themselves in it. Basically, they would have drowned themselves there. But no matter what you do, it does not matter. Because in chapter 10, then the angel went up to God and was welcome and said, "O God, thy creatures have breathed their last." Isn't this God all-knowing? Isn't this God everywhere? Wouldn't this God already know this? Why does it need an angel to be tattling and so forth and letting this God know what the fuck's going on? Doesn't it already know? But once again, this God sends his word again, as if that means Jesus, and raised them from their death. That's 3. But we're not done. Because in chapter 12, Adam threw himself on the ground from grief and so forth, and was dead. And same with Eve. And once again, Jesus is coming along and raising them up from death. No matter how many times they kill themselves, no matter how much pain they go through, it does not matter. Thing is, then we have chapter 13. And I found verse 8 rather interesting, because this shows just how sadistic this version of God actually is. And I do want to say, bear in mind, this is a Christian idea. But if I had let my wrath fall heavily upon thee, I should have destroyed thee. And had I turned thee into darkness, it would have been as if I killed thee. This God that the Christian believes in is absolutely evil. But then it wants to shift the blame and shift the burden onto, and acting in verse 16 as, "Yet I knew that Satan, who deceived himself, would also deceive thee." The thing is, if this God knew that this Satan, who was not actually in the actual Bible anywhere in the Genesis story, but just going by the Christian horseshit, if this God knew that Satan was going to do X, and it sat back and did nothing, it is responsible, because it knew what was going to happen, and it still made the choice to do nothing. This character wants to shift the responsibility from itself, just like the Christians that make this shit up. The God doesn't want to take responsibility for what is very clearly its own choice. The God does not take responsibility for anything, because God, in things like this, and when you're dealing with a Christian, God is a representation of their own ego. It is, they don't take responsibility for anything, so their God isn't going to take responsibility for anything. It is not saying that that's what an actual God would be like. But then God had told them that he should suffer for their salvation. That is so unbiblical. That is Christian bullshit. And that is the entirety of chapter 15 of 1st Adam and Eve. This is all a contrived bit of bullshit regarding Christian rewrite of the Adam and Eve story. But then in chapter 16 we see something interesting. In verse 6, that Adam thought the sun was God. Now, try to wrap your brain around this one. If a God would exist, does it really make a whole lot of sense that you would confuse the sun with this God? Or to use another term, the aspect of Jesus, a picture of Jesus and the sun. Would you confuse the two and be, I can't tell the fucking difference? No. Only if you're a babbling fucking idiot. And if you're that much of an idiot that you can get confused between the Son and Jesus, just telling you don't do something, that's not enough to convey a message, because you're dealing with a fucking idiot that can't tell the difference between a star in the sky and a person. But this is the type of horse shit. But, and this isn't by far the end of the suicides of Adam and Eve, but this one, you would have thought this would have done it. Because in chapter 21, Adam threw himself down from the top of that mountain, and his face was torn and his flesh was flayed. Much blood flowed from him, and nigh unto death. No, if you're ripped apart, you're fucking dead. Then Eve threw herself down as well and was basically ripped apart by stones. They jumped off a fucking cliff. But the God doesn't matter. He sends this fucking Jesus again to raise them up. And at the bottom of that, O Adam, all this misery which thou hast wrought upon thyself will not avail against my rule. Holy fuck! You can kill yourself over and over and over again, and this God will just be, I'm going to keep bringing you fucking back like the goddamn Highlander. There would reach a point where even if you would be suicidal, you would look at it and go, you know what, this is fucking pointless. Why kill myself? Because this fucking sadistic God is not going to let me stay dead. But then there is the covenant of 5,500 years. It really raises the question, where are these Christians coming up with their numbers? Because from the research that I've done, the Adam and Eve account by biblical standard goes back to about 4,000 and 4,400 BC. So where's this 5,500 year covenant? What the fuck is that? And that is nowhere in the Bible. That is simply Christians making up their own bullshit. But there is a whole lot to this. And yes, if you actually go through, and I did earlier, one thing you do start to see around chapter 20 and so forth is a narrative switch to being that Adam and Eve stopped killing themselves, because obviously it should have dawned on them sooner or later, probably after the jumping off a cliff and being torn apart, and this God being, oh, no, I'm bringing you fucking back. I'm not done fucking with you yet. So they stopped trying to fucking kill themselves. Then in later parts of this serpent and so forth that is tried to be claimed as Satan, it kills them once, but even with that, doesn't matter. Jesus is coming along and bringing them the fuck back. This is all a bunch of contrived horseshit. The thing is, I could go into more depth on this if you really want, but the bottom line with it is the mindset behind whoever came up with this bullshit clearly didn't understand they're making the God psychopathic, narcissistic, as well as displaying a codependent type of mindset, because these terms are largely psychological, and the mind of the people that made this shit up would not have realized just how mentally deranged they are making the God figure. If this God figure is something that is supposed to be admired, worshipped, adored, and it is as clearly mentally fucking ill as is obvious from reading these bullshit stories, it really makes me wonder why anybody who is not themselves mentally fucking deranged would give this anything other than read it to maybe amuse yourself or to get a good laugh. But don't look at it as anything that is actually, if a God would exist, I have the idea it would just be having its hand over its face and going, oh my God, do they actually think I'm this evil? Because something that would be a benevolent person or entity would not behave in any way that is depicted like this. But these people, they don't care about that. Because the God is just a psychological projection of themselves. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Later, people.